The terms slave patrol and militia were interchangeable and synonymous, literally the same exact thing.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discord of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
Currently, what the communists call their Negro Revolutionary Movement, now masquerading behind the humanitarian banners of civil rights, is contributing tremendous momentum to the communist plans to take over the United States.
You tell them white folk in Mississippi that all the scared niggas are dead. We want black power. We want black power.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The amendment would also give the federal government the power to enforce that principle.
I heard about Sacramento. I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the capital, packing.
Tear down this wall.
So Clinton comes into office in 1992. Know what else happens in 1992? August 21st of 1992 begins the siege at Ruby Ridge. So what that was, federal government comes up on a house of people way up on the top of a mountain, tries to get them to rat out a bunch of people and stuff, and when they refused, they killed a bunch. The government killed a bunch of them. Now here's the thing. They were racists. Total racists. The Weaver family. Total racist. They hated the government, and they wanted to separate themselves from the government. And society and people. And I'm so good with that. Like, you want to be a racist, whatever. I can't stop you from being a racist. And my favorite kind of racist is the one that goes and lives in a little house with their family way up on top of a mountain and doesn't try to make anybody else be racist and just doesn't want anything to do with anybody. Those are my favorite kind of racist people, right? So they get up there and they do this. And they buy this house, and right down the street or down the hill from them, basically, is the Aryan Nations compound, which is a hardcore racist compound of Christian identity Nazis. People are into the Turner Diaries, and they read the protocols of the Elders of Zion and this stuff, and they have this Christian notion of racism. Very much like a more like if you full on brought Hitler into the John Birch Society stuff, that's really that's the Aryan Nations. And the Weavers would occasionally go hang out with them at their picnics. And huge compound the Aryan Nations had. It's like full on like neo-Nazi boneheads and shit would go out to the Aryan Nations compounds for huge events and stuff, right?
This envelope up here is a symbol of the Aryan nation. That is your race. You see that inverted swastika, the sword passing through it. The symbolization of that is the resurrection from the death of our people by Professor Waddell, the great Aryan historian, who said that symbol denoted nothing less than the resurrection and the victory of the Aryan race over the darkness of death and hell.
Richard Butler was an aerospace engineer who retired in the mid-70s and moved to North Idaho with his wife Betty. They bought some property and later changed the mortgage and the deed to Church of Jesus Christ Christian, tried to make their land, their property, a nonprofit church. And that was basically the birth of the Aryan Nations. And by 1981, they burned the first cross there on the property and started holding annual Aryan World Congresses.
Richard Butler was not a person that was dynamic, and he was not a great speaker, but he was quite effective at publicity. And so he was able to get a lot of publicity, not only with national media, but even at times international media. And I think they were fascinated with the idea that he created these two organizations. It was somewhat unique in the sense that his political arm, which was neo-Nazi, or really not the Nazi doctrine, was the political arm, and then to have a religious arm. That really resonated with interest with the national media. And so they would come, and he would do two things a year that would draw media. Oftentimes in April, he would have a racist skinhead youth conference. And then in July, he'd have his so-called World Congress of the Aryan Nations, and he would draw about 300 in the mid-'80s at that each year. They'd come from Canada and all over the United States.
Butler believed in what he called the territorial imperative, that white people should flock to the Northwest and that they should leave the Southwest to Hispanic folks and the Southeast to black people, and I guess the Northeast to Jews. He had this idea that somehow the country, the United States, could be somehow parceled up into different regions where different races and ideologies could live with their like-minded individuals and people with the same color skin and the same belief system. And initially there was a lot of disgust, but there was also a lot of people just didn't want to register an opinion. As long as they don't bother me, I'm not going to bother them. And so they sort of wanted to look the other way, and it's like, well, they're not affecting my lifestyle or my family, so let them do what they want up on their hillside. A lot of individuals from throughout the country would, for example, get out of prison. They would hear about Butler, and they would come to Butler's compound from places like Arizona or Texas or wherever, and would live for a short period of time in a bunkhouse that he had there. And he also had an office and a printing press. They would print leaflets. And one of the first things that we saw a lot of were leafleting of neighborhoods in Coeur d'Alene and in Spokane, and they'd print these racist leaflets. Sometimes they would just drop them on the doorsteps, put them under windshields, and people would wonder who's doing this? Why are they distributing this racist literature? And a lot of it would come back to the Aryan nations. In fact, the Aryans, during their 25-year here, most of the crimes that people that came out of the Aryan nations compound committed were not committed in this immediate area. They were committed elsewhere. This was their base of operations. They did print counterfeit money there, and there were a couple of murders in North Idaho that were related to racial activities. But for the most part, most of their heinous crimes, including the bombing of synagogues, robbery of armored cars, I mean, the list goes on. I mean, it's unbelievable, really.
A white America!
But the Weavers would go hang out with these people and go to their barbecues and whatever when they needed that human interaction, because as much as they wanted to be isolated, people just you gotta chill with people every once in a while. And anyway, it turns out there was some people who were maybe a lot more outspoken and militant in their racism than the Weavers may have been, but they were still cool with chilling with them, and they did. ATF, government, Clinton, whatever, this new administration comes in and wants to target the Aryan nations, right? Because they're a haven for people who have been committing bombings and terrorism and killings all over the country, right? And one of the ways they decide they want to target this compound is via the Weavers. They know the Weavers are into guns and whatever, and they get the Weavers to do some stuff like modify a gun, and it turns out it's an illegal way of modifying the gun, so they charge the Weavers with it, and then they come to them and they say, okay, now look, since we're charging you with this thing, we'll let that go, but we want you to go down to the Aryan Nations compound and fucking roll over on them, and wear wires and do whatever. And he was like, fuck you, I ain't doing that. And he didn't, so it became a standoff in which the federal government ended up killing his wife and one of his kids. Meanwhile, while this is happening, this totally won over Heartland America to the far right, anti-government, now burgeoning militia movement that's aligned with the Aryan nations. It's getting a lot of love from them suburban fucking people home going, yeah, well, who's this Clinton in there coming in, taking away their America? This is just good Americans who wanted to live up on top of a mountain. Now, again, it is overstep. Again, this is what Democrats do. They come in and act like they're the bastion of being against all the racism and all this shit, and then they come in and do this stuff, and it's like they get treated like they fucked up somehow, like it was some mistake. And it's just two sides of the same coin, these Democrats and these Republicans, right? But they'll target even people that essentially served their purposes well just a year ago. They're happy to, under a new administration, now target that community because it's all about oppressing the people, the masses. Street thugs are never a part of the ruling class that they so feverishly and so with such religious fervor fight to defend, because they have the illusion that they'll somehow be allowed entree into these ruling class realms, which they never will. And so even though they're out, in one administration they're loving them, like under a Reagan, or now as you see under Trump, they're the greatest people ever. But in a moment they'll pull out the Night of the Long Knives.
Brown-shirted street toughs known as Sturmabteilung, or SA, stormtroopers led by the brutal Ernst Röhm.
Ernst Röhm was one of the few men that Adolf Hitler feared. This beefy, dual-scarred, decorated soldier, a man of undaunted courage. He was the leader of the brown-shirted millions, the stormtroopers, whose lungs and fists had helped to bring Adolf Hitler to power. To consolidate his power, Adolf Hitler needed the support of the apolitical German army. Unfortunately, the generals could not abide Ernst Röhm, his 2.5 million stormtroopers. Hitler was forced to choose between the instrument that had brought him to power and the instrument which could keep him with power.
Adolf Hitler moved swiftly and decisively, using as his instrument the SS, the black-shirted assassins of Heinrich Himmler. It was a night known as the Night of the Long Knives. In a coordinated series of strikes, the leadership of the SA was destroyed. Across Germany, over 900 brown shirts would meet an SS assassin's bullet. The organization was decapitated. The SA, the last stumbling block to Hitler's power, was gone. Only Röhm remained. Having refused a pistol to kill himself, Röhm was denied his final raging demand to have Hitler assassinate him personally. SS men firing point blank killed him in a merciless storm of bullets.
So, Ruby Ridge galvanizes the far militant right wing in America. It's like, oh, fuck no, it's war. And all the rhetoric of, again, the Zionist-occupied government is deep in the militia movements they're training hard now. They're preparing. That's when the rhetoric of, it's coming. The Civil War is coming. Get prepared, people. That's when all the prepper fucking shit starts to happen, right? And look, and then it doesn't help that the next year, 93, is when the fucking standoff in Waco goes down with the Branch Davidians. Right? Where, however you give a fuck, care about their religious beliefs. My take on that, from what I saw, was ATF just came in and murdered those people and burnt their fucking house to the ground.
In 1993, Americans watched breathlessly as FBI agents faced off with a self-proclaimed religious prophet and his armed followers in Central Texas. This was the Waco Siege, a weeks-long standoff between the federal government and a religious group known as the Branch Davidians. Established by leader Victor Hautef, the Branch Davidians are a Christian sect, an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, with a literal interpretation of the Bible's prophecies. Hautef and a group of his followers settled near Waco, Texas in 1935. Branch Davidians believe in the second coming of Jesus Christ and a day of judgment in which God will punish the wicked and reward the good. In preparation for Judgment Day, the Branch Davidians isolated themselves from the outside world in their commune near Waco. Confined to a 77-acre compound called the Mount Carmel Center, they established their own way of life. The group had gone through various divisions and changes in leadership before it was taken over by a charismatic Bible teacher named David Koresh in 1990. Koresh was a self-proclaimed prophet and believed that he was appointed by God to bring about the end of the world. Unlike his predecessors, Koresh practiced polygamy, taking a number of underage followers as wives who bore his children. He also collected guns and ammunition in preparation for the coming apocalypse. Word eventually reached federal authorities that the cult was illegally stockpiling weapons. On February 28, 1993, agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms arrived at the Mount Carmel compound, armed with search warrants for the property and an arrest warrant for Koresh. Gunfire erupted, although it's unclear which side started it. At the end of the 2-hour standoff, 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were dead. The FBI intervened. Nearly 900 members of law enforcement descended on the compound, including Texas Rangers, Army personnel, and National Guardsmen. For weeks, FBI negotiators bargained with Koresh, bringing in supplies and allowing him to sermonize on the radio in a bid to get him to surrender. Though he allowed a number of Davidians to leave, Koresh displayed no signs of turning himself in. Agents then tried hardball tactics. They turned off the electricity, blasted loud music, and flashed harsh spotlights into the compound's windows. That didn't work either. After a 51-day standoff, Attorney General Janet Reno gave the FBI the green light to raid Mount Carmel. On April 19, 1993, tanks rolled in and punched holes in its walls and deposited nearly 400 canisters of tear gas inside the building. Several hours later, a fire broke out.
This far out in the country without fire hydrants, you have to haul all of your water. It's just a very bad scenario here at this point.
Winds fanned the flames and reduced the entire property to ash within an hour. Around 80 Branch Davidians died, including David Koresh and 25 children. While most died from fire and smoke inhalation, 2 members were found with fatal bullet wounds to the head. 4 federal agents were also killed during that siege.
And that just further, emblazoned and solidified in the minds of this militarizing underground sort of right-wing thug movement, further into believing that their righteous, glorious, supposedly religious fucking cause was just and true. Here it is. They're attacking people for their religious freedoms. And my take on Waco ultimately is that they had to stomp that shit out, because it just flexed a little bit like, you can't fucking tell us what to do. Fuck you, American government. And they're like, oh yeah, fuck you. Murdered all of them. Are we seeing a theme here that when you fucking tell this government, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me, they're like, bullshit. Just atrocity after atrocity. The entire history of the United States is slavery, genocide, and war, and violence, and brutal slaughter and oppression of anything that stands up against it. But in this particular case at Waco, on the heels of Ruby Ridge, holy shit, these right-wing communities, these full-on racist, militant fucking right-wing communities, they don't think it's here, it's not now. It's like, they're like, okay, they're getting ready to totally take away all our guns, and that's when all that's coming. So we got to protect our Second Amendment rights, hardcore. That's when a lot of this begins. Really kicks into overdrive under Clinton, the whole, we got to protect our guns, they're coming to take our guns. That just, by the time you get to Obama and even now, they're coming to take our guns, oh my God. But that begins, that's another one of the talking points that fuels their organizing for fucking mass revolt and the Civil War shit that we're seeing really unfold right now. So there's one of these guys that's one of these people, these right-wing racist militia people that's reading the Turner Diaries, that's fucking, you know, he's seeing what's going down at Ruby Ridge. He's seeing what happened at Waco. He's an ex-military dude. He's got training. He loves America. He's cool with God. There's a dude named Timothy McVeigh. And him and his homies, they get together and they bomb the Oklahoma City Federal Building, killing a bunch of children and shit.
Several months later, a federal grand jury indicted 12 of the surviving Branch Davidians for unlawful possession of firearms and aiding the murder of federal officers. Many believe the government's actions were overly aggressive and maybe even illegal. The raid drew sharp public criticism, and controversy swirled over whether or not federal agents started the fire and shot the Branch Davidians. At the center of the storm was Janet Reno, who issued the final order to raid the compound. In 1999, she appointed independent counsel John Danforth to investigate the incident. Danforth concluded that the agents were not responsible and placed the blame squarely on Koresh and his followers for setting the blaze and shooting themselves in order to fulfill their apocalyptic prophecy. The investigation failed to satisfy critics who, to this day, believe in conspiracy theories of a federal cover-up. For some right-wing extremist groups and patriot militias, Waco was further evidence of a government willing to use its power against its own people. One of these extremists was a 24-year-old disgruntled Army veteran named Timothy McVeigh. Radicalized by Waco, McVeigh would retaliate for what he saw as the injustices of the Waco Siege by bombing a federal building in Oklahoma City, exactly 2 years to the day of the siege at Mount Carmel.
Which just creates massive budgets for the ATF, which is one of the things that one of the main agencies that all these right wings are really focused on retaliating against. They get massive budgets, and then we should see what happens under Bush Jr. when we get there. But the other thing that's going on in the midst of all this, in 94, 95, right in the middle of all this, Clinton signs the crime bill, his infamous crime bill. Minimum mandatory sentences, 3 strikes, you're outlaws. A whole bunch of new additions to laws that demand and require death penalty. Massive billions in funding for new prisons. Those slave patrols that then became the convict leasing market, that's what, like I said earlier, kicks into 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, right? That's Clinton. So Clinton, who was your guy with the sunglasses who played saxophone on fucking Arsenio and shit, the first black president, the bourgeois media called him, that only served the purpose of feeding the narrative of fueling the tyrannical delusions and paranoias of the right, and gave cover for his administration to pass this disgusting fucking racist as fuck crime bill. That's the Clinton era. It's just another, again, way with which the American imperialist, racist, patriarchal status quo has to redefine itself to defend itself within each new era. But little bits and pieces of the new forms of mythology and the new talking points that it throws at this effort, they don't just disappear, they become a stream of sort of talking points that further strengthen and solidify that mythology, that like, because they can come back and be like, look, ever since the 60s we've been calling out the outside agitating Marxists that are coming in to disrupt everything and kill and destroy America. They're influencing the Clintons to take away your freedoms, and they're attacking our religious freedoms that are under attack because of the Satanists. That was a huge, huge satanic panic. I should point that out. Oh my God. By the time it gets to the Clinton era, it's massive satanic panic. It was under Reagan too and in Clinton, but it's in that whole like 20 years is holy shit, the right wing is literally convinced Satan is in video games, music, everything. It's in the schools. And then, of course, if it's a Democrat, the right wing is going to believe that they're Satan too. Like, you've heard Alex Jones spew that shit, like, out loud a million times. Back then, it was just in the churches, oh, it's the devil and whatever. But it was much easier for the right wing to believe that the devil was influencing a Clinton than it would be for them to believe that of course, it wasn't influencing Reagan or Bush, because, you know, Jesus and It's Morning in America and whatever, right? And they're protecting your freedoms in your lawn from your TV at home, okay? It's all just little components that add further and further to where at some point it's not just talking points that facilitate the status quo. It's a thing that instantly makes people just go, I have to go kill things now. That they see a black person and go, that's a BLM Antifa terrorist, murderer, satanic being. I have to run it over with my car. It's pedophiling things. That doesn't just pop up out of a vacuum. It takes time for people to internalize that amount of, to where a person who like can employ critical thinking would look at the soup of all the things I just said and be like, how, it just doesn't seem like there's any type of cohesion or sense to it all. It sounds like insanity. And really it's not. It's got such a long tradition. It's been so well crafted over time, and they know. It's not like, you know, a lot of it isn't just, it's not like every single thing that happens is a purposeful, you know, manifestation of their designs. It's just, it's a lot of it is that, and a lot of it is them learning from their mistakes and re-employing new things and adapting. But by the time Clinton's done, the amount of anti-Satan, anti-ATF, government tyranny, rhetoric, and Marxists and communists and all the things, big government intrusion into our rights. That's, you know, Reagan fear-mongered about big government forever, and by the time Clinton comes around, whether he was, they're both big government, right? But they would just point to all the things that was going on that I just described as, look, there it is, there's literal proof of the big government. And so the right wing is like anybody but Clinton, and they elect a fucking C-average student, bourgeois motherfucker, went to Yale and shit, but has a fake-ass Texas accent and bought a ranch in Texas. Upper East Coast fucking bougie motherfucker, son of Bush Sr. W. That's what's next. But first, check out this video. I'll be right back.
What is the process?
A step in the dark?
Over the past 2 days, Berkowitz has told Inside Edition that he did not act alone, that others were involved in the murders of 6 young people.
And then they became like the boogeyman. They became like Freddy Krueger or something.
Yeah, there was all kinds of stories. Lots of conspiracy theories.
This is not a Halloween fable. This is a real-life horror story.
It's my estimate that there's approximately 40,000 practicing Satanists in America.
There are over 12 million teenagers and younger children who are now involved in the occult.
I was a child during what sociologists now refer to as the Satanic Panic.
Today, we are compelled to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help us God.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible? Is that possible?
Oh my God. It was said that this cult was also responsible for the Son of Sam murders.
I was told that, we're all brothers and sisters now. If you betray this group, you have to understand we're going to get your family. We're going to get them, because Satan won't tolerate anyone being a turncoat.
Joining us now is Maury Terry. Maury, one former New York City cop says Berkowitz is lying flat out. How do you respond to that?
I think it's in his own self-interest to say that. They have something to hide, something to protect.